Hello, my name is Zan Lyons. I combine audio, visuals, and code to create work with symbiosis at its core. If a sound plays, a visual plays on the exact frame. In short, my work exists between gaming, cinema, and music. I call it interactive visual audio. And I'm going to show you how I use Ableton Live as my main tool for sound design. First, I'd like to introduce my next piece, Terminal. The video you have just seen was created in a game engine called Unity, using mobile phone 3D scans inside subway trains during the lockdowns. I wanted to capture the sense of tension and isolation, and the layers were added to give a certain physicality that you get from beats, but without the usual grid-like rhythm structure. The sound design was created in Live, and I'll break down my process. I use a laptop for production with no external hardware. I use my phone for image capture and recording real-world sounds. I also play the viola and the cello, both recorded with the laptop's internal microphone. I really don't care about tools, and I can't stress this enough. In fact, the less equipment I have, the quicker I get to my core idea. I'm going to use a pre-prepared live set. For the sake of time, some of the later stages have been completed and placed in a group. Here is the session view, where I typically begin my process. First, I set tempo snapping to none. This is because the piece has no fixed tempo. The tempo can, however, affect warp settings, but I'll talk more about this later. I have a large library of sounds that I've collected from various sources over the years. Everything from breakbeats, found sounds, and strings. Samples are then usually manipulated in Live. The main difference between sound design and normal music making is that the audio has to serve what's happening on the screen visually. See the sound as a layer in a larger world, as opposed to something existing on its own. When creating my pieces, I make the audio while playing its specific visual element. Then I export the sound to my video editing software so I can place them accurately on their required frames. I'll be using a Max for Live plugin called Ebosuite. Here's an audio track with the Ebosuite Eclipse plugin loaded. I have 4 short clips from the longer piece that I'd like to create sounds for. Now I can simply drag them onto this track and trigger them in the same way I can audio. Next, I'll assign the clips to keyboard keys by first of all turning off the computer MIDI keyboard option, using the Command K key command, selecting the clip, and then pressing the desired key. There's a reason for this, as you'll discover shortly. I want to create a sound for this clip moving through the train. It needs a certain weight to bring up the intensity I feel. I'm going to go to my user library and to the strings folder, and I'm going to select a cello sound as a start point because of its depth and low tones. I'll select the sound and then press click to preview to listen to it. I think this works, especially the second note, so I'm going to drag it into an empty audio track. I'm going to isolate the note by going into Clip View, which is here, and by using the start and end markers. You may have noticed that the clip sounds time stretched. This is because its original tempo is 120 BPM and the tempo of the project is 96 BPM. You may not want this, and if that's the case, you can turn off time stretching by pressing Warp in the clip view. I actually like it, and I'm going to time stretch it further by pressing the ×2 button once. And this is because it's going to form the basis of a drone. I think it's a little loud, and I'd like the pitch to be lower. Both of these can be changed. I can change the volume using the gain slider, and I can change the pitch using the pitch dial. Next, I'm going to add a reverb to the cello to create the drone sound. I'll go to Audio Effects, Reverb and Resonance, and I'll select the standard reverb. I think this effect has a really magical quality about it, so I use it all the time. I want a really long reverb, so I'll turn up the decay fully. Think of the decay as being like the reverb time. I'll turn up the diffuse. Think of diffuse as being like a blurring of the reverb. I'll turn the dry-wet ratio from 55% to 100%. This means there's only reverb and no dry signal. Next, I'll hit freeze. As you can hear, the reverb is playing endlessly. I like it, so I'm going to resample it. Resampling is the process of taking an affected sound, or even an entire track, and recording it as a new sample. I'll go to this empty audio track, which I'll rename to Drone. In the Audio From section, I'll select Resampling. I'll record arm the track and click an empty clip slot to begin recording. Now that that's recorded, I can go ahead and delete the track with the original cello sample. If you recall, I said there was a reason that I'd assign the video clips to keys. I'm now going to assign the drone sound to the same key as the video from earlier moving through the train. Both the video and audio are triggered simultaneously. I like it, but I think the pitch could be lower, so I'm going to lower the pitch of the drone by an entire octave. I want the sound to match the grainy quality of the video. So I'm going to go to Audio Effects, Drive and Color, and I'm going to select Overdrive. I'll turn the drive up to 75. And the dynamics up to 100. The lasers repeat a lot throughout the piece, from different positions and angles, so simply repeating the same sound would be somewhat jarring and boring. Instead, I'm going to use a breakbeat and cut it up. This is because our brains hear a beat as a single dynamic entity, so using elements of the beat for variations of the laser will add variety without feeling random. Here's a small selection of breakbeats from my library. I like this one, so I'm going to drag it into an empty space and it'll create a new track automatically. I'll place it before the Ebosuite track for the sake of clarity. I'm going to duplicate the entire track by clicking the track and using the Command-D key command. The reason I'm duplicating the entire track is because it gives me the flexibility to apply different effects to different parts of the sound. It also makes exporting the sounds later much easier. Okay, I'm going to isolate the kick drum using the start and end markers. I'll now assign this to the same key as the first laser, which is called flash. I'd like the kick to feel a little more metallic, so I'm going to go to Audio Effects, Pitch and Modulation, and select Phaser Flanger. Here, I'll select Flanger, set Amount to 0, and turn the feedback up slightly. When amount is set to 0, the effect doesn't modulate. I'll go to the second clip I've copied. I'll isolate this snare. And I'll assign it to the same key as laser. Let's quickly rename these. I still think the snare needs something to match the ambience of the train, so I'm going to use the hybrid reverb. The hybrid reverb is similar to the standard reverb, except it allows me to import my own sampled reverbs from real spaces. These are called impulse responses. Here's an impulse response that I recorded in a tunnel in a nearby park using my mobile phone. I can drag it straight onto the effect. I like it. I'll just dial the dry-wet ratio down a little bit. I want a sound for this slowed down laser, and I want something with weight, so I'm going to use the kick drum again. I'll simply copy the kick drum and paste it in the duplicated track. Here, I'm going to show you how I use time stretching as a sound design tool. I'll go into my clip view. I'm going to once again press the ×2 button. I'll press it again to further stretch the sound. It's worth noting that the tempo of the track will affect the time stretch algorithm. For example, if I increase the tempo, the sound doesn't stretch as much. You can play with this. I'm going to actually now try a different warp algorithm. Currently it's set to beats. I'm going to go to texture and see how that sounds. Also good. Let's assign that and see how it works with the visual. I'm going to try complex and see how that sounds. I'll stretch it again. Let's have a listen to the sounds, along with their respective clips. I still think the laser needs something else. Because you can assign multiple clips to a single key, it's possible to very quickly layer sounds. I'm going to go into my library and I'm going to select this clap. I'll put it next to the snare for clarity. As you can see, sounds saved to the library are saved with any effects that were in their track. So I have an EQ8 with some high end, and also Saturator, which is a distortion plugin that I use all the time. Here it is with and without. The drive is turned up. This determines how much the audio is distorted. Then there's color. Color is like an EQ for the distortion, and I'd recommend experimenting with this. Depending on the source material, you get very different results. I'm going to assign the clap to the same key as the snare and the laser. Let's turn it down a little. And without the clap. I'll now export the sounds to my video editing software so that audio and video can be perfectly aligned. I'll select the sounds I wish to export by simply dragging over them in the session view, then dragging them onto this icon here to take them into the arrange view. I'll place the sounds on their respective tracks. I'll select the length of time that I wish to export. Then select the tracks I wish to export by selecting the first track, holding Shift, and then selecting the last track. I'll go to File, Export Audio Video. Under Render Track, I'll select Selected Tracks Only. Then I click Export. Unlike the session view, video can be loaded directly into the timeline without the need for third-party plugins. I've exported the full video and its corresponding sounds from my video editing software and placed them in a group called Imported Video. Let's have a listen. I'm going to jump to later in the track. I'll add some reverb to give the sounds a sense of space. Automation is a very powerful tool for making sounds change in accordance with what's happening visually over the duration of the piece. Let's go back to the beginning of the track. As we can see, the lights appear further away, but this isn't reflected in the sound. I'm going to turn on automation mode by clicking this icon here. I'm going to use an auto filter to give the sound a sense of distance. The filter is already set to low pass, which is what I want. I'm going to lower the frequency parameter. Let's have a listen. This is good. However, if we move to later in the video, the sound no longer reflects the visual. I'm going to go to the track, lasers, select auto filter, select device on. I'm going to create a breakpoint here, and then here again. You'll see it says on. I'm going to drag the second breakpoint down. At this point, the parameter changes to off, and the red dot indicates that the parameter has been automated. You may have noticed there's a utility plugin already loaded on the track, and there's a red dot on the balance parameter. What I've done here is automated the pan position in accordance with what's happening on screen. This gives the piece a lot more movement. The reason I use the utility plugin and I don't automate the position on the mixer is because if I automate the utility plugin, I can move it before or after other effects. I can now add additional sounds to the video directly in the arrange view. Nothing else will require the same accuracy as the laser sounds. I'm going to get the drone from earlier and place it in the arrange view at the beginning of the piece. I want it to end just before the first laser starts, so I'm going to drag it just to here. Let's go to the part of the video with dissolving people. This part actually repeats at the end of the video, and I want the sound to make the viewer aware of this. I'm going to create a new audio track using the Command-T key command. I'm going to go into my library, and I think I'm going to use some strings. Let's put that here. Okay. Let's just trim it slightly, and then let's copy and paste it using the Command-C and Command-V key commands. I like it, but it's a little too subtle, I think. So I'm going to create another track. I'm going to go back into my library, into Found Sounds, and here are some keys that I recorded with my phone. Let's put these keys here. I like this part here, so I'm going to trim the clip. I think it needs more. I'm going to lower the pitch and see how that sounds. Now I'm going to go to Effects, Delay and Loop, and select Grain Delay. It creates a pitch delay. I'm going to set the dry wet to 50 and the pitch to -6. And if I turn the feedback up, you can hear a cascading effect. I'll now add a standard delay by dragging it on the track, and I'll turn the feedback up. I'll copy and paste this at the other instance of the same scene. Just before the lasers start, I want to create a sense of anticipation. I'm going to create a new track, and I'm going to go into my library. And I'm going to get a breakbeat. Let's adjust the pitch. I'll turn warp on first so I can loop the breakbeat if I like. I'll keep the current timing, as timing doesn't really matter in this context. Let's loop this part. And let's turn the pitch up to about 8. I'll change the warp mode to beats. I'm going to go back into my library, and I'm going to drag an effects rack that I've got saved onto the current track. As you can see, there's an EQ and a reverb. Let's have a listen. There's a saturator at the end of the chain. I'm going to turn up the reverb's dry-wet ratio to 100, and listen to what happens when I turn the saturator on. The reverb is distorted, and this is a very good way of making a wall of sound. I'm going to quickly automate the output of the saturator. and I'm going to make it end just before this laser starts here. This will automate the volume of the entire sound because the dry-wet ratio of the saturator is turned up to 100%. I think the piece still sounds a bit too electronic, so I'm going to play some live viola to humanize it. I'll create a new track called Live Viola. I'm going to add a reverb preset I always use on strings called Viola Reverb, as I like to hear the affected sound while I record, and unlike resampling, I can change the parameters after recording. I'll open System Preferences with the Command, key command. I'll go to the Audio tab and the Input Device section. I'll be using my computer's built-in microphone. In the Mixer Input section, I'll select In. Now I'll record on the track, hit record, and play along to the video. Finally, I'll export the completed audio to my video editing software, where I'll line up the sound and the images and export the final piece. Thank you for watching, and I really hope you've been inspired by what you've seen. Remember that in the end, these are all just tools. Art is a conduit for the divine, and if you treat it like that, the journey will be endless. Thank you.